All right, cool. So, yep, Ray Dalio is back in the news. I absolutely love Ray Dalio. First time I ever got introduced to him was it was a Tokyo Crypto show. It was MLD and Charlie doing a show where they played Ray Dalio's uh, Changing World Order or something like. Anyway, absolutely love Ray Dalio. I think he's very smart, and I pay attention to a lot of the content that he says. And what he's saying here, it's not like groundbreaking. You know what I'm saying? When you think about it, you think of the amount of wealth that has been accumulated by the boomer generation just in the real estate world. Now you got to figure, boomers were from 46 to, I believe it was 69. I could be wrong. I believe it's in the article. I don't have the article up in front of me, but it was from right after World War II until the 60s. All right. So in the 1980s, when the boomers were in their 20s or 30s, from the 1980s until present, the housing market has exploded 500%. So as the boomers get older, my father was a boomer. My father passed away. So boomers are getting to the point where they're retiring and they're passing away. They're transferring their wealth to millennials. So the amount that's quoted in the article is $73 trillion. That's the largest wealth transfer ever. Second of which being the greatest generation transitioning their wealth. And I believe the total there was $16 trillion. But Brendan, I want to go ahead, go ahead and turn it over to you. What specific insights do you have? And hopefully we can have a pretty good conversation after you're finished talking about it.
Yeah. So this article was really interesting to me. I think that, when you transfer over the next 20 years, $73 trillion from an old generation, that's not going to invest in technologies, not going to invest as much in the stock market, not going to invest as much in riskier assets because they're the later aspect of their lives, either dying or just starting to just move their money, to their children because they don't need it as much anymore now that they're being retired or whatnot. And so, one of the big interesting notes is, okay, what's the investing differences between the older generation and then millennials and Gen Z? In 2022, it was interesting because almost 60% of Gen Z and millennial investors owned either cryptocurrency and or stocks. And believe it or not, and again, I'm throwing in Gen Z here, but again, some of these older generations are going to be sending the money to Gen Z as well, so they'll be getting some of it. But crypto actually had an edge over stocks. So as this money moves from older hands to younger hands, of course, you expect them to start investing in things that are more cutting edge, more new, and more focused on their generation, which the older generations weren't investing in. So this brings us to the question, right? Okay, where do they put this money? If last year in 2022, 60% were putting money into crypto and to stocks, then we could start seeing a lot of this money starting to go into more risky and more newer style investments. So I think we could see an uptick in money going into the crypto sector over the next 10 to 20 years, not just from the people that are getting in, but just from all of this old money moving into younger hands. So for me, I've been thinking more of, okay, younger people are getting into crypto, but I didn't think of it as this wealth transfer being moved to a younger generation. And that's a really interesting topic to me personally, and one that I think is a really, we keep throwing out the perfect storm theory, which again, there's a lot to that, but this is a longer time, right? We're talking over the next 20 years. So this could allow crypto to continue to grow at a rapid rate. Now, we may obviously only see that growth, the largest point of that growth in one area. Maybe it's the next 5 years. Maybe it's the next 10 years. We don't know for sure. We have our opinions and our ideas. But the other thing in this article is that the government is getting poorer because they're giving more money out. They're printing more money to give to the people, right? Which is causing high inflation. All of the money that they printed for COVID, all the money that they printed for Ukraine. Okay, they're saying they're transitioning the wealth. And this is where I don't fully agree with the article. But they are saying that the wealth is shifting from the government to the people. Well, if the government just prints money and sends money to the people, they're not creating wealth, okay? They're creating inflation. While people may have dollars, it's worth less. And so there's two parts of this article. One I agree with, and one I think that he's missing a little bit of the reality of the situation, which is when we print money, we create inflation. And we're seeing that. We've seen that. And so I don't think that's wealth transfer. But I think the 73 trillion from old hands to younger hands is a really big and interesting, thing happening.
I agree 100% with you. When I was reading the article, and again, to me, it's not really news. It's good to put out, you know what I'm saying? But it's not really something that's like breaking or earth shattering. It makes sense when you think about it, simply because boomers are getting older, boomers are retiring, boomers are passing away. That money gets transferred down. Now, but I agree with you 100% on the second aspect, because the only area that I could really understand a transfer of wealth would be the fact that we would have 0% interest rates since pretty much 2010, 2011. So the ability to borrow money cheap and have access to cheap money has certainly enriched people. However, I don't think that you can just broadly say that the everyday person, you and me, are getting richer while the government is getting poorer. I don't think that there's been enough wealth generated across the board in the millennial generation to be able to say that. Again, certainly different, if you're a real estate investor and you've been a real estate investor for the last 6 or 7 years and you've taken advantage of those 0% interest rates, absolutely 100%. But as far as across the board, that's not something I agree with. Something that you also have to keep in mind also is you have things like, student loan debt, and you have, record low savings accounts in banks right now and stuff like that. So I'm not exactly sure you can say that America's getting rich while the government's getting poor. I think in a situation like that, I think when the house starts to crumble, everything is pretty much coming down. But, that's my intake. Panel, open it up. Please give your insight.
Well, actually, so Weep the People said something very interesting that, Jen, if you could bring up that comment again here. Ultimately, what's going to be happening, and this is actually going to segue into not only the wealth transfer here, but also kind of what Coinbase is doing currently, is that, Weep the People, he says, my generation exists online. They'll be exposed to crypto by their favorite influencers using NFTs and video games. That's 100% true, bro, because ultimately what's going to end up happening is that the newer generations, like millennials, are the old generation at this point, and the newer ones after that are going to be literally online constantly. And so, magical internet money, right? Magical internet money is going to be crypto, and they are going to be bringing in more and more of this generational wealth from the boomers right into online presence, right? So this is one of the reasons and one of the factors why, GameFi is going to be such a big deal this coming cycle and all that. Ultimately, ultimately, we're just going to get so much retail in come the bull cycle because of this reasoning, So, yeah, Jay, I know that you had something to talk about on this.
No, you actually nailed it pretty square in the head there, and Weeb too, because the millennials all exist online, right? And as much as I dislike the fact that most people exist nowadays, and a lot of people have lost the ability to interact socially in person, and as much as I dislike the amount of degeneracy that goes online, you can't deny the fact that future generations of people are going to exist online. And so whether they like it or not, they're going to be exposed to crypto to some degree, right? And to a significant degree as we move further down along into the future, right? We've mentioned it, that NFTs are going to be used in video games. Well, one of my favorite companies, Square Enix, they've already said that they're going to integrate NFTs onto their games, right? Can you imagine the significant fan base that Square Enix has, both in Japan and in the West, right? And their video games, Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest. If you introduce NFTs to that, you think people are not going to go crazy over collecting those like they went crazy collecting Pokemon, right? It's like it's a no brainer. It's a no brainer. You think the streamers streaming Fortnite, streaming Call of Duty, streaming Overwatch, streaming the Harry Potter game, streaming Baldur's Gate, streaming whatever, like insert X game here that integrates NFTs into their games. You think that people aren't going to start exploring other avenues that exist within the same umbrella of the NFT space, right? You don't think that Twitch streamers are going to start integrating like payments in cryptocurrency once they integrate that function, right? Because here's the thing, right? I guarantee you right now, the technology to use that as a payment system is not that difficult to integrate, and it's not that difficult to create, right? What is difficult is getting that kind of adoption. And so who's going to create that adoption? Well, the people who exist online. And so it's inevitable, to be quite honest with you. It really is. So that's kind of my take on it. That was a pretty damn good question, actually, or actually good comment from Weeb there. But yeah, it's inevitable, guys. Once the big influencers start integrating cryptocurrency and NFTs and all the stuff into their streams, it's like hands off, man. You're gonna get people throwing money at this left and right. We already see how degenerate people are in Japan, right? Throwing their life savings into gacha games. I mean, you know?
Hey Jeff, you got any input here, bud?
Let's see. So y'all made good points. I'm into real estate and construction. So a lot of back in the day, that's how most people made their money. Not most people, but a lot of people made a lot of money in real estate, right? So when my dad back in the day, let's say 40 years ago, would go buy a house, the cost to income ratio now is about 4 times higher. Wages have underproduced about 4x compared to that. So the housing market is getting harder and harder to get into. One, I think that's deliberate. Well, one, supply and demand. There's more people. So, but two, I think people like BlackRock and JP Morgan, they deliberately don't want these prices. People keep saying, "Oh, just wait, the housing market's going to crash. It's going to crash." I really don't think it is because there's too much of a demand for it. So that's going to make it hard to get in. And you have these big companies that want to own 10 or 30% of single family rentals. They're willing to spend more to acquire them. So if you're willing to spend more, what happens? Supply and demand. The prices are going to drop. So it's going to be really hard to accumulate wealth in real estate. So what do millennials do? Like y'all already pointed out, technology, things like that. So they're going to say, well, what's another avenue for a store of value that also appreciates? So I think more and more people will kind of gravitate. I think crypto is going to be the new investment haven of what real estate was. The way people used to get rich and get generational money back in the day with real estate, I think that's what crypto will basically be now.
That's a shit hot. Yeah, that's your input there was awesome, and it's something that I know in the back of my head, but it didn't come to my mind when I was considering what I wanted to speak on in this. But you're absolutely right. The income to home, the income to home value or the debt to income ratio, or however you want to classify it, what it was in the 70s and 80s is totally flipped at this point. The values of properties have gone up 500% since the 80s, but wages have pretty much been stagnant through the entire period. And you're right. I 100% agree that I don't know if there is going to be a period where we see a drastic drop in home value simply because of the demand that's coming from the institutional bankers and the institutional money. I don't know if there is enough. I don't know if there will ever come there might be, if the United States ever truly starts to default, then of course housing prices are going to go down. but any relative soft, recession or anything like that, I think that they're going to meet.
Josh, you're muted, brother.
Hey, Josh, your fast keys again. Your hotkeys there are going crazy.
My bad. I was just trying to do something else. Anyway, great analogy. Great input there. Absolutely loved it. Does anybody else have anything to add before we hop to the next topic?
Get on the train, baby.
Yeah, just one more thing. I really like when Jeff brought up the topic of real estate, because remember back when we were kind of doing our intros and you asked how we all got into the space, and I spoke about how when I tried to get into the real estate industry, the barrier of entry was so high. Well, Jeff pointed it out there. What happens when you have something like tokenized real estate, right? When instead of buying a whole property, you could buy fractions of it, and you can dip your toes into the industry that way. Not only does that expose people who, like me, were in that position where they wanted to get into that asset class, but the barrier of entry was so high. Well, now I could buy portions of it. And also what that does is it makes that asset, to a degree, it makes it more liquid, right? So it makes it a bit easier to buy and sell, as opposed to buying and selling a house. Try to go through that process and see how long that takes you, right? So that's another kind of positive way that crypto integrates all of these different avenues of finance, right? Of asset classes, right? It makes them more liquid, because when you can tokenize something and you can buy it and sell it on an exchange or a certain marketplace, it makes it a lot easier to move. So I that's what I wanted to say on that, because that was a really good point, Jeff, that you brought up. So thanks for doing that.
No problem, buddy.